Okay, thank you for coming to this webinar to understand more about mental health. Before we begin, I would like to invite you to join me in a simple exercise. It takes about a few minutes. Okay, so make yourself comfortable in your seat and wherever that you are sitting. It can be in the living room or in the kitchen or in your own room. Make yourself comfortable. Notice your posture and feet on the ground. Maintain a good posture with your head comfortably balanced above the spine, arms, and legs. If you are sitting on the chair, notice your feet placed firmly on the floor. If you are sitting on the floor, maintain a good posture with your legs uncrossed. Begin by taking small, deep breaths. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Notice how your abdomen rises as you breathe in deeply. Breathe out slowly through your mouth. You may imagine in your mind as you breathe out, you are breathing out through a straw. Notice how your abdomen falls when you breathe out. Take your time to do this simple breathing. Breathe in slowly through your nose and breathe out slowly through your mouth. Gently redirect your attention to notice or look around 5 things that you can see around you. You may wish to turn your head around, to the left or to the right. To notice 5 things that you can see. If you are in front of the computer, the laptop, you can say, I see the laptop. If you have any pens or stationeries on your desk, you could take your time to name them individually. Notice what you observe 5 simple things that you can see and say them aloud. Notice 4 things that you can touch around you. You can start with your hair, your hands. You can rub your hands and notice the sensation. Your elbows, other parts of your body. You could pay attention to the physical sensations that you touch. For example, I feel the chair that I'm sitting on. I feel the clothes that I'm wearing on my body. I feel the floor beneath my feet that I'm sitting on. Next, name 3 things that you can hear around you. Gently focus your attention on the external sounds in your environment. It could be the sound of the clock ticking, or the sound of the aircon or fan blowing the wind. the sound of your stomach rumbling. Say the three things aloud. For example, I hear the sound of the car being passed by. I hear the sound of the MRT train being passed by my house. Notice two things around you that you can smell. You may wish to move to another spot to smell if it's not around you. If you are having your lunch as you are listening to this webinar, you can notice the smell of the food, or if your family member is cooking in the kitchen, you may wish to move closer to notice the smell. If you can't smell anything or move around, then name two favorite smells that you can remember. Say one thing you can taste. It could be the toothbrush from brushing your teeth, or sweet in your mouth, or the food that you just ate. It could be the food that you are eating currently as you are doing this exercise. If you can't taste anything, then say your favorite thing that you taste. Take another slow, deep breath to end. Notice your breathing and gently redirect your attention to the present moment. Thank you very much for doing this exercise. This exercise is a simple exercise that helps us to be present in the present moment. Sometimes when we are caught up in things that we are doing, we will rush from one activity to another activity. We will not have the time to take a break, to center ourselves as we move on from one activity to another activity. So this exercise is something that you could try. That takes about 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes to center yourself and notice things around you. Notice what is going on in the present moment before you move on from one activity to another activity. Okay. So for today's webinar, I'm going to share with you about trauma and stress-related disorder. Okay, what does it look like? What is stress? What is trauma? What are some of the symptoms that people may experience where they experience stress and trauma? And how can we help ourselves, or how can you help other people who are going through these experiences, or you notice that they are going through these symptoms after a stressful situation or a traumatic situation? Before we begin, I just want to check with you, what is your understanding of stress? How does stress mean for you, to you? Is stress something a negative thing or a positive thing? Does stress invoke any emotions or thoughts in your mind? Sometimes when we are very stressed, we can say that I'm very stressed. Oh, but what does that mean for you? Take a few seconds. You may wish to type it in the chat function, have a look at it. Or if you like, you may just unmute yourself and wish to share about this. What does stress mean for you? I can see some of you are writing. That's good. Thank you very much. It's both positive and negative. That's right. And it helps you to complete some tasks as well. Yeah. And some of you also share about the physiological symptoms. and the emotional symptoms, the sleep difficulties, anger, right? And also the impact of the stress as well, like some motivation, getting overwhelmed. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's right. And also I think one of you mentioned, it also depends on the amount of stress that you're having, right? And it's our response to the pressure or the situation that we are experiencing. That's right. I think all of you have shared that very well. Yes, and you're right. Stress is something, can be a positive thing or a negative thing. All of us, we need a little stress in our lives. If you can just recall, all of us before taking examinations or even before giving a presentation, like me, when I have to give a presentation, I have to prepare for the slides. This little stress that I'm experiencing, it's useful for us to help us to increase our productivity and performance. It helps us to even search for resources, engage in help finding behaviors, right, to find solutions or find resources to help us to address our condition. Right? And as you can see that as our stress level or arousal level increases, our performance increases as well, until when we became the peak stress performance. So stress is a common feeling that we experience in the response to the challenge that we have been experiencing or demand on our brain, on our body. It's part of everyday life situation. And everybody experiences some level of stress at some point of their life. And some of that we may identify may last for the event, like for example, once you give the event, once you give a speech, or once you finish the examination, the stress level goes down immediately. At other times where we have the stress level that becomes too high, where we tip over the optimum performance, it becomes impaired in our performance. We notice challenges, carry out certain tasks, loss of concentration. So some stress is good. It gives us the momentum, motivation, and also increase our productivity. And the optimal level of stress that we have correspond to the best performance outcome that we are doing. However, once you reach the tipping point, it becomes too high, the performance decreases. So all of us have our own level of threshold or the optimum level of stress. Therefore, stress is not something that what happens to the person, but rather how the person reacts to the situation or what happened to them. It's how we cope with the stressful situation that is critical factor. There are many individual differences in how people respond or cope with stressful events, as the stressful events themselves can also help to determine the health and illness. As you can see in the previous slide, right, the moment we tip over the optimum level of stress, it affects our performance and it can contribute to our health and also triggers some illness. So rather than focusing on the stressful situation, right, why not understand about how do we cope or how do we react when we experience stress? Why not understand what are the reactions when we encounter stress? How do we cope or deal with the stress? Once we understand the stress factor. So stress is a physiological and psychological arousal. It is something that is inborn in us. You can see in the picture, it comes down from our ancestors, to the caveman mode, that we need this stress to help us to identify the threats, the physical threats. For example, the saber-toothed tiger, dangerous animals, predators. So whenever our body senses a stressful situation, it produces a physiological and psychological arousal. And this is an automatic response and helps humans deal with the threat or danger by either they fight the threat or they run away from the threat. However, in the modern times, in the situation, often we don't have physical threats anymore. And most of us is the mental threat that we experience. Okay? The threat could be things that we share later on. I share you later on in the slide. These are some of the mental things that we go, the situational stresses that we experience, that our body produces the same psychological and physiological arousal as if were the last time, in the caveman mode. So whenever that we encounter stress, it is a natural common reaction that physiological and psychological arousal will be produced, and it helps us to deal with the situation. Either we fight or no, we deal head on and solve the situation, or we flight, we run away from the threat. And some of the stressful situations that we encounter could be divorce, marital difficulties. It could be grief, loss of a spouse, loss of a family member, and with the recent COVID pandemic, there's also loss of job, loss of employment opportunities, loss of financial security. And this is also very common now in pandemic as well, parenting as well, where now parents have to work from home and to take care of their child at the same time working from home. Single parenting, single parents, parents who are not be able to be together because of the pandemic. All these also can become a stressful situation. And also worries about our health, right? Whatever that we are experiencing, especially the pandemic, we start to worry about, will we get COVID what happens if we do get something COVID, or what happens if we get cancer, or worries about our own or our family members' health as well. And also the burnout is also one of the source of stress, where we find ourselves difficult to manage the work task because of the uncertainty in the workplace. And this work situation can be even triggered or contributed by transitions. For example, moving from working to retirement, right? Moving from staying at home working to even going back to the office. It could be a source of stress. So acute stress often involves brief focal events that can be sometimes experienced as overwhelming, but after the incident has ended, generally the stress level will go down. It's a chronic stresses that includes events that persist over an extended period of time. For example, stress from taking care of a family member with dementia, long-term unemployment, ongoing COVID pandemic, stress from dealing with the outcomes or the consequences of divorce, consequences of loss of family members, all these, and difficulties are managing transition. And what happens when we experience chronic stress over a long period of time? When we perceive ourselves that we are not able to be resourceful to cope with the threat, our body will then release these stress hormones or the cortisol levels into our bloodstream. So under the chronic stress, the fight or flight response that I mentioned does trigger, and this contributes to the disease or the physiological arousal. The heart rate will start to elevate. You notice you have shortness of breath, difficulties breathing, the breathing rate will increase. You notice tension in your muscles at your shoulder level, shoulder area. Sometimes it will be tension on your stomach, abdominal area, nausea. Sometimes you also notice your blood pressure start to increase. All these physical changes happens with a stress response. With the increased hormones and cortisol levels, our body will go into the fight or flight mode, and all these physiological responses that you notice, the heart rate, your breathing, your muscle, your blood pressure, your stomach, your head, on your head, tension, all this happens because of the stress response. So when we encounter stress, there are 4 different domains that is being affected. The physical part is being affected, like what I mentioned. The emotional part also it starts to be affected. You start to feel feelings of frustration. Some of you also mentioned feelings of anger, sometimes the feeling of nervousness, anxiety, depressed. And our thoughts start to worry about the future. We start to have unpleasant images coming through our mind. We start to ruminate our past. We notice difficulties concentrating. We notice we are easily distracted and our performance becomes poor. And we notice having difficulties making decisions. And behaviorally, how we externalize or how we show our stress, how people observe us, we start to pace around. We start to withdraw from other people, from our friends, family members. Perhaps some of me, this is something I'm guilty of. We start to eat excessively, eat ice cream, eat chocolate. Sometimes we may have difficulties regulating our emotion. We start to shout, start to have emotional outbursts. We start to have drug use as well, for example, alcohol, smoking, and often also this also affect our sleep. We start to have difficulties falling asleep, maintaining sleep throughout the night, or waking up early in the morning. And this also contribute, again, reinforces the emotional part, frustrated about our sleep, worried about our sleep, worrying whether our sleep quality will deteriorate because of the stress. No. So all these 4 domains are going in a circular manner that once a domain occurs, it will triggers the emotional and thought and behavior, and it goes on and on and on and on and again until it becomes too overwhelmed for the person to cope. And with the recent or the 2 years of almost 2 years of the COVID pandemic, research done by IMH has showed that nearly 1 in 10 people reported mild to severe stress-related issues related to COVID-19. So this is something that is very important and significant for us as a society or for the government to address that. Stress is becoming more and more increasingly challenging for us in the pandemic. Most of only 1 in 10 respondents met some criteria for having mild to severe stress. And some of the triggers are financial fears, worries that loved ones will be infected, worries about their stability of their job, worries about when all this pandemic will be over. All this created this stress response. So then what is a trauma? How does stress link to trauma? So stress and trauma are something similar with each other. Trauma refers to the psychological emotional reaction that a person develops in response to having witnessed something negative event. So if we look at stress is a very small component and we build up over a period of time. It could be something small like acute, it could be something that is built up over a period of time that is chronic, that contributes to the triggers of stress response. A trauma or traumatic event is something that is a very big experience or big situation that overwhelms the body coping resources immediately on the start. So what are some of the common reactions that a person may have trauma? Before you even understand what are some of the common reactions to trauma, what actually is a traumatic event? So a traumatic event can be anything emotionally distressing, life-threatening to themselves, to oneself, or to other people, important people in their lives, that overwhelms the one's usual ability to cope. Okay, so it needs to have a very emotionally distressing, life-threatening to themselves or to other people, and it needs to occur, overwhelm this person's ability to cope and leaves them feeling helpless or powerless. Sometimes the trauma may not be us experiencing the trauma, but we're even hearing about things that or situations or events that happen to our family members. They could even make us feel very helpless or powerless and overwhelm our usual ability to cope. It could include any of the following events, for example, experiencing a road traffic accident, either you or your family, physical or sexual assault, natural disasters, famines, earthquakes, tsunami, medical emergencies, heart attack, witnessing your family member having a heart attack. Recently, with this coming week, the emphasis on war as well, that people are experiencing trauma symptoms after war, and this particularly affects children. And most of the common reactions that most of us feel are relief. The first instinct or first reaction that we see under the trauma, understanding trauma, is that the first feeling is a relief after the traumatic event, and followed by the stress, fear, or anger. And this traumatic experience may actually trigger people to realize that they can't stop thinking about what has happened to them. And it activates this stress response, like I just mentioned. It keeps them to be a very high level of arousal, feeling alert, looking and searching for signs of danger around them. So most people have stress response, like I just mentioned, after a trauma. And having such a reaction is nothing to do with personal weakness. It's nothing to do with saying that there's something wrong with you, there's something bad about you, there's something weak about you. And this stress response may last for several days or few weeks. Initially, when people are experiencing a road traffic accident, they may have feelings of on edge, having trouble sleeping. At times, it may be hard to do daily activities they are used to doing. For example, like going back to work, taking public transport, if you're going for, if you have a road traffic accident, going to school, spending time with the people that care about you. For some people, when they're going through a repeated trauma experiences, sexual abuse, physical abuse, or war, all these, the symptoms can build up over time. Just like the stress response, it can be built up over and over time, that it may overwhelm the body, resources, ability to cope. And no two people experience trauma symptoms or who even experience the similar trauma are affected in the same way. So for example, if you have one brother or one sister that experienced a road traffic accident, the family members, both child experience trauma symptoms very, very differently. And it's normal to have upsetting memories, feeling of age, and having trouble sleeping after the traumatic event. And this also impacts us, the impact of trauma in our day-to-day lives as well. And it varies for different people. So, for example, this is the similar physiological arousal that you feel. The emotional are some of the similarities. However, they also have more different feelings start to emerge. Guilt, feeling unsafe, worry about future events will happen, future negative events will happen. Sometimes they have behavior, they notice excessive checking because their body is on a track state. Having difficulties with interpersonal relationship, they start to withdraw. Having lifestyle changes, they start to avoid going to school, going to work, avoid taking a certain path, fearful of trying new activity, or stop making effort, or stop taking steps to have a structured routine. So for younger children, they will experience becoming fearful in new situations after experiencing a trauma episode. And they became more clingy towards their caregivers, towards family members, especially their parents. They may experience some separation anxiety, refusing to let go or to be separately away from their family members. They may have temper tantrums, crying, and sometimes they may reenact a trauma through their play. For older children, this may manifest more in emotional outbursts, mood issues, low mood, worries about bad things will happen. Some of the emotions that they have will have self-blame, guilt, shame, and some of the behaviors they may experience, like I mentioned, they may avoid going to school, avoid meeting their friends, having poor concentration in class, difficulties in concentration in class. And for adults, and they are more likely to engage in unhelpful coping mechanisms like smoking, drinking alcohol. They are more vulnerable towards developing future mental health disorders like depression and anxiety. And they're more likely to have chronic diseases. And it also affects them to form interpersonal relationships in the long run. The person may feel unsafe, betrayed, difficulty trusting others, and every time this could lead to heightened emotions such as anger or aggression whenever they encounter interpersonal relationship or interpersonal situation. They may start to numb their emotions, isolate themselves from other people, and a tendency towards self-blame, shame, and guilt. For most of us, these symptoms will go away on their own after a few months. Okay, this is a simple graph that you can see that within 1 to 6 months after the trauma, most of the symptoms will start to decrease drastically. And from the 12 months to 6 months, it will still decrease, but not so drastic. It will plateau after a while. And the only one is the intentional trauma, like physical assault, that will start to increase because it could be likely it's ongoing complex trauma, ongoing trauma experiencing. Yeah, so resilience or the psychological resilience, as what we psychologists like to define it, what is resilient about? It's the ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis. Just like how we talk about stress. Stress is about how we cope with the stressful situation and how we cope with the reactions that the stressful situation brought about. Similarly, resilience is the ability or the mental ability or emotional ability to cope with the crisis and return to the pre-crisis status quickly. And most people, generally a majority of number of population, develop psychological and behavior capabilities that allow them to cope and to move on from the incident without long-term negative consequences. So generally about 80 or 90% of population, when they encounter the one episode of trauma, they will return back to their pre-crisis status about 6 months to a year. What are some of the factors that make it difficult for them to return back to the pre-crisis status? It could be the ongoing trauma, like I mentioned, the lack of family support from the in your environment, lack of support in your environment, the sense of shame, the sense of self-guilt that sometimes could be reinforced by in their interactions in the environment. So it's important that we take early strategies to help ourselves when we encounter any stressful or traumatic experiences. And what some of the simple strategies or self-management strategies that we can do when we encounter a stressful or traumatic experience. It's important to have supportive relationships. Supportive relationship with family members or others in the community has found to be helpful to build resilience and overcome adversity to confront challenges. Children who receive extra support from their family members and friends cope better after experiencing traumatic experiences. So believing that people are care about you, having a social support that people care about you, being able to talk about your trauma with supportive people around you and talk about your reactions regards to the trauma that arises from the trauma. And having supporters who avoid reacting in unhelpful ways when they say that, oh, why you didn't do this? How come you did that? Yeah. And they may sometimes avoid asking you to talk about the trauma by saying that no point talking about it. So having supporters who avoid reacting in unhelpful ways when talk about trauma helps the person to recover from stress and trauma. And this is something similar also when dealing with stress. Being able to talk about your stress and your reactions to the stress with supporting people, having people who avoid reacting in unhelpful ways when you share about your stressful situation and your emotions, and having the mindset or belief that people care about you and will be there for you if you need them. And also behaviorally, what can we do? It's important to keep back to a routine, such as going to work, school, doing chores, maintaining a sleep schedule and diet. So scheduling some pleasurable activities, one activity a day, one hobby a day, engaging in your interest. It's also important not to avoid safe reminders of the trauma. Sometimes we may avoid thinking about the trauma, which again reinforces or increase the likelihood that we will think about the trauma. And staying connected to friends and family is important. Why is this important? Because it increases a sense of normalcy, predictability, and security after a traumatic event. So with the children experiencing trauma, some of the stress symptoms following trauma, having a schedule or routine helps them, ensuring that they're following the day-to-day tasks, what are the day-to-day responsibilities they have to do, having a family event or activity where they can spend time together with family, and not avoiding to talk about the topic, stressful topic or the traumatic topic. And one of the ways also, the third way that we can do is eliciting a relaxation response. Okay, so the first exercises that I share with you is a way to elicit a relaxation response. The relaxation response is a profound physiological change that's opposite to the stress response. So when this relaxation response is activated, we enter into a psychophysical state of deep relaxation. Our heart will go down, our breathing rate will go down, our muscle start to relax instead of contract, our pressure will start to go down. And research has shown that it only takes about 3 to 17 seconds to activate this relaxation response in our mind. And some of the techniques that can shift from a relaxation to from a stress response to a relaxation response is taking a simple walk or doing a simple exercise, breathing exercise, taking a warm shower, listening to soothing music, grounding techniques like the one I introduced you during the beginning of the webinar, muscle relaxation techniques, prayers, social support, meditation, mindfulness exercises. All these can help to shift from a stress response to a relaxation response. And the fourth one is making meaning of what has happened. And this is something also that's useful for both stress and trauma. Finding helpful or realistic way to fit that stressful or traumatic experiences into the way you think about yourself or other people around you. So some of you could be asking yourself, what is a different perspective? What would I say to a friend who was undergoing a similar experience? Look for past examples of the way that you did your best to cope with it. How did you manage to overcome or deal with the previous stress? What resources did you have or that you found that were helpful for you to cope with the stress? Notice unhelpful thoughts that get in the way of making meaning, such as having a sense of self-blame, shame, feeling of shame, guilt. taking a step back from being fused or hooked on to those unhelpful thoughts. For example, instead of getting entrenched into the vicious cycle, like I mentioned, hook on to those thoughts, you can take the 3 simple steps of noticing, naming, and normalizing our thoughts and emotions. For example, we could notice the thought that comes into the mind. I notice that I have a thought of, I don't know, and we can name the emotions that come into our body and notice that I have this emotion now. And we can normalize it, like to say that it's a common natural reaction to feel that way. What is this emotion trying to help you or trying to tell you about this? Why is this emotion important for you at this moment of time? So using an observer stance, an observer self to observe these thoughts and emotions in a non-judgmental way often helps in the sense-making experiences of the trauma. And lastly, it's also about practicing self-compassion, acknowledging that suffering is part of a human experience. It's not, I mentioned, always go back, it's not because there's something wrong with you. The responses that you are experiencing, the physiological and psychological arousal that you are experiencing, acknowledging that it's a part of human experience. It's not that there's something wrong with you. Notice having come up with some kind thought to ourselves, some kind thought and behavior, responding to yourself kindly. You can ask, how will I be kinder to myself? You can even provide a statement, say as a statement, may I be kind to myself in this moment? May I give myself the compassion that I need? And observe negative, unhelpful thoughts with openness and non-judgment. It's going back to what do I notice the thoughts that I'm having? What do I mean the emotions that I'm having? And what does the emotion and the thought tell me about the situation at this moment? Or how does this emotion and thought help me to deal with the stressful or traumatic experience? So this is for someone who actually going through a stressful or traumatic experience. How about you, if you know of somebody who is going through a traumatic or stressful experience? How can you help? It's important to listen to them. Start by giving time or providing time to listen to them. Give them time to talk. Avoid asking leading questions, lots of questions. Respect what they choose to share first. In the beginning, it may be hard for them to share every single thing. Let them share what they feel that they could share at that moment. And accept their feelings, validate their feelings, acknowledge that this is something that they are going through. Again, like I mentioned, it's a natural, common reaction. Do not blame or criticize for their behaviors or reaction. Use the same word as they use. If they use the word survivor, use back the same word survivor to trauma. Do not dismiss their experience. Do not invalidate their experience, what they're going through. Do not say that, oh, it only happened once only. And do not give advice unless you're asked to. Sometimes it's all about just listening, understanding, and if you checking with them, what help do they need? How can I help you? And provide encouragement to follow their routine and scheduled activities. Spend time with them towards together engaging in activities, pleasure activities or hobbies. For family members, parents, one can spend time with their children, engage in the activities with your friends, spouse, or other member. Make time and spend time engaging in activities and give them time to talk about the trauma and avoid dismissing their experiences when they share. And lastly, is help them to find any support or resources when they request it. And this is some of the available resources that is available online and in the community. Okay, so we do have the counseling hotline, which is the Samaritan for Singapore, the SOS hotline. This is a very common hotline. All of us that know this and will call. Also the IMH helpline and the Singapore Association for Mental Health hotline. In 2020, we have the new National Care Helpline because of the COVID. And this also is another avenue that you can call and talk to the person should you experience any stressful situation or traumatic experiences. Okay. And also we have the online resources. We have the www.mindline.sg. This is a local website developed by IMH to provide some of the resources on how to deal with stress and trauma experiences. And this is also another website that's developed by the local in Singapore. And also for children, this is a child trauma network for parents or caregivers to understand what are the different experiences that the child may experience after undergoing a traumatic experience. And should you need a face-to-face session or Zoom session with a mental health professionals, you can go to the community health assessment team, and it's available in the community setting. So the first two are mainly in the community setting, family service center like 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, they do have counseling services. You may also go to the polyclinic to get a referral to see the psychologist. Psychologists are stationed in the polyclinics. At least one psychologist stationed in one polyclinic, and you could see a doctor and get a referral to see a psychologist at a polyclinic. Or alternatively, you could go to the polyclinic and get a referral to see the psychiatrist in the hospital or the specialized occupation clinic in the private setting. So before we end, once again, I invite you to join me in doing a simple mindfulness exercises. Make yourself comfortable in your seat first. Just notice your posture and your feet on the ground again. Right. Now, make a focused word, phrase, or prayer. It could be something secular like one, peace, calm, or relax. So next one will be sit quietly in a comfortable position. You may wish to close your eyes or focus on a spot in the room. Notice your muscles. Relax your muscles, starting from your feet, your calves, your thighs, abdomen, shoulders, head, and neck. Just notice it. You may want to do a little bit of simple stretch. Relax the part of the muscle. And breathe in and out naturally as you do. And when you do that, say the focus word, pray or prayer to yourself as you breathe out. So for example, if you choose the word peace, if you breathe in, peace. And you breathe out, peace. You wish to do this a few times and assume a passive attitude. Don't worry how well you are doing, and don't worry about doing it right, whether you're doing it wrongly, whether you're confused. Don't worry about it. When other thoughts come into your mind that is not related to the focus word, simply say to yourself, oh well, and gently return to your chosen focus. You continue for about 2 minutes or so. And you can notice, you breathe in, you breathe out, say the word peace. It's the word you choose. Other thoughts come to mind, simply say to yourself, oh well, and focus. Okay. Continue sitting quietly for a minute or so. Allow other thoughts to return. If you close your mind, you can open your mind. If you close your eyes earlier, you can open your eyes and sit for another minute. This is a very simple mindfulness practice that you can do once or twice daily. I put that to start off with 2 to 3 minutes. If you find it useful or you find it getting used to this rhythm or this exercise, you may wish to increase it to 5, 10, or 20 minutes. Yeah, thank you very much. Here is the end of the talk.